Okay, I think we need to get going. Hey, I'm looking at the screen here. I'm just amazed at the number of friends that are here. Thank you all for being here. If you have a camera, appreciate you turning it on. Just one of our motives here is to get to know each other better, so appraisers can work together instead of in an isolation booth. But just great to see everybody. So let's go ahead and move on. I see Jim's here. Later on, when we get to the question and answer part, Joe Lynch. Joe, wave to everybody. So he'll be in charge of screening your questions on the chat function. And then Cindy is here somewhere, I'm sure. She'll be doing that also. And then John Ferris, many of you met him in my classes. John's the guy with the hair. He's not waving. He's going to wave any second now. Wave, John. Yay, that's him. Okay, thank you. Oh, he's not happy with me already. Shucks. Oh well, nothing new there. All right. Brought to you by valuemetrics.info. You guys pretty much, most of you know what we do. We teach the stats, graphs, and data science, trying to bring modern analytics to the profession, not just modern reporting. Jim Park is here, has agreed to be our guest. Really appreciate that very much. If you look on his picture there, you see a little airplane, and I'll ask him about that little airplane on his lapel in a few minutes. Here's what we got coming up. We've got an in-person class coming up in Minneapolis. Those of you who've never taken the class, that's a rare opportunity. John will be there also to help, and Cindy, and another friend from the Canadian across the border to Canada. So you'll have four people helping you hands-on if you come to that class. And of course, we teach online pretty regularly every 2 months. Why do we do this? It's to pay it forward. The profession's been really good to me. Also, it's a way of advertising our classes. That's about all that's the only thing we sell, really. We try to give away the open source software. Applying artificial intelligence, prompt-driven appraiser analysis. We find that the deeper we go into this, the more important the appraiser's competence and judgment become, and the less important the actual coding and computer stuff goes. And for me personally, it's to express my intense anger at the enormous bureaucratic cost of trying to provide innovative education at a reasonable cost. The cost of getting approvals far exceeds the actual cost of production and getting education out. Oh, basically our curriculum, for those of you who have been in the class, but it looks to me like more than half of you already have been. We talk about the 5 dimensions of similarity, which is a more refined scientific method of getting your comps, what's truly comparable and what is not. We reduce the issue of adjustments down to 3 basic fundamental adjustments. There's only 3 algorithms. That's all that applies. All the complexities are simplified. We focus on data-centric and visual methods, graphs, maps, pictures, tables, and simple statistical tools. None of that hard inferential statistics, just mean, median, mode, range, standard deviation, maybe skew. That's about it. Pretty simple stuff. Using the RStudio user interface, it manages all those programs, which are all open source and free to you. And it also keeps track of your work file. And I know for sure, like John Ferris, we were teaching a class the other day, and he pointed out that he doesn't even have a printer in his office anymore. Everything's electronic. Just amazed me. The work files there, everything's automatically taken care of for you. It does take some effort to get organized. So the Community of Asset Analysts is our volunteer organization. We focus on evidence-based valuation using data science versus trust me opinion. We try to update to modern analytical skills rather than the old fake adjustments. We move to prompt-driven expert judgments. We're finding that artificial intelligence can be really terrible in some ways and really good in some other ways. It's really good at syntax and making sure that code periods and commas and things like that are done. You don't have to be a computer programmer at all. You just have to know the theory and the appraisal process. And we focus on universal valuation standards. The basic principle here is, I don't care if it's an AVM, an appraiser, an evaluation, or a waiver. The process is identical. It's only a matter of who does what and how well and how secret it is. For example, AVMs are all secret algorithms. And the emphasis is on developing repeatable valuation and risk models for our clients. Our clients really need to know risk. They don't really need to know your opinion of value 2 weeks ago based on subjective selection of data. So the world is changing. We're trying to be ahead of that. My name is George Dell. You know me. I'll be doing about a 5 or 10 minute introduction, basically providing a context to what we're doing here, which is Jim's focus is, of course, on regulation. And that's covered by the 5 frictions of what's causing, what's killing us. The appraisal degeneration. Number 1 is the practice. We continue doing things the way we've always done them. Our education repeats that. User-client expectations. It's embedded in the regulations politically and, of course, in the appraisal standards, which were basically written about 40 years ago and don't have a whole lot of changes, frankly, in my opinion. In the last 6 or 7 years, there's only been 1 word changed in Standard 1. And for this, we pay millions of dollars. So that's kind of a good segue into what Jim's going to talk about. Jim Park is our guest. I want to read 1 paragraph here that he wrote about his paper. After nearly 2 decades working on the front lines of appraisal oversight, including 16 years leading to the Appraisal Subcommittee, I've seen firsthand how well-intentioned policy can evolve into an overly complex, inefficient system that's increasingly out of step with today's financial markets. I think that's really the focus of our entire hour or so here together today. The 5 frictions of appraisal degeneration. So after I'm done, Jim will make his presentation with some PowerPoint. Then I'll ask him a few questions, and then we'll turn it over to Joe and Cindy, who will take your questions. Go ahead and post them on the chat function on Zoom, and they will handle that. And then John Ferris also is our backup on that. So data science and artificial intelligence. We found that coding and programming is basically not necessary. You need to know what you're doing, not how to be a computer programmer. However, using the right prompts for artificial intelligence does work, and it works well. What's needed is your clear instructions to the program so it runs the right algorithms, and then you have to verify that you're getting what you want. Our value-metrics education builds on your traditional historic appraisal experience. Everything you learned in the past is not thrown away. We expand on the underlying economic theory, human behavior theory, and how that ties in with data science. Data science explicitly recognizes the need for you, the expert. It's not statistics. It's the melding of the analytics and your judgment. And we emphasize the analytic and reporting value of visuals. The human brain is really good at visualizing and seeing things. You can see markets. You can see entire markets, which you can't see with 3 comps. The 5 frictions. This is basically my presentation here for just 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to Jim. The 5 frictions hold back a real modernization and improvement of the appraisal profession, just like regulation holds us back. Each of the 5 frictions interact with each other. It's like crabs trying to get out of a bucket. One crab tries to get out, and the other ones all pull them right back in. That's how I see the 5 frictions. You try to get out on one, the other ones will pull you right back. And the 5 frictions are established practice, the groupthink. Our education continues to teach the same old stuff. Our clients are us, are the reviewers and editors, and they expect us to continue doing what we've always done. It's embedded in the law and regulation, and it's embedded in the standards. So let's look at these individually, one at a time, the 5 of them, then I'll turn it over to Jim. Appraisal practice. Legacy appraisal methods still dominate the established belief structure. Groupthink is basically it may be wrong, but by gosh, everybody's doing it that way, therefore it's okay. And that's actually embedded not only in our appraisal standards, but in the regulations that bounce off of the standards. So the underlying theme is pick comps and make adjustments. And that was created 40, 50 years ago, and that's what we continue to do today. Number two, our education continues to teach all that stuff I just said. Our qualifying education embodies traditional legacy appraisal practices. Very little modern stuff gets in, certainly on the qualifying education to get your appraiser license in the beginning. Profit in education comes from repeating the old stuff over and over again. It's easy to write, it's easy to teach, it's easy to hire teachers cheap, but it's expensive to create new and modern technology and data-centric methods. That's actually a financial penalty to try to go forward into the future, alongside of just plain human resistance. Number three, expectations. In USPEP, it says the scope of work appraisers should do what their clients expect. Those aren't the exact words, but it's pretty dang close. They expect things to be the way they've always been, just the way it is in our bank manual. Reviewers are also appraisers, and they have the same education, same practices, same old ways of doing things, and they will insist on you doing things the same old way. Number four, regulations. This is Jim's bailiwick, will be focused on the rest of today, but they embed and enforce and may put it into law, administrative law, that this is the way it's got to be done. We've got, I don't know of anything else in our country that is governed by more different groups, states, counties, private organizations, the quasi-governmental appraisal foundation, the federal, 50 states plus other jurisdictions, and they're all different. They all want money. Number five, USPEP. This is my favorite. Yeah. USPEP is when you are in violation, the only person that says you are in violation is another appraiser who says, you're bad and I'm good. The appraiser reviewer criteria, standard 3, are different and conflicting with what you are supposed to do in standard 1. The appraisers in standard 1 says you must be impartial, independent, and objective, and the word credible is used dozens of times. Worthy of belief. You got to be worthy. That is the judgment standard on which you're judged and can lose your license. You can lose your career on that. Okay, well, how about reviewers? Standard 3. Well, standard 3 says you are judged by different things, not independent, impartial, and objective. It says you're judged on completeness, adequacy, accuracy. The reviewers knows the actual number, right? You don't, but they know how accurate you are based on what they know. Relevance and reasonableness. Did you know that there are only 3 actual violations in USPEP? Everything else is somebody else's judgment that you're bad. Number 1, don't be grossly negligent. Number 2, you must keep records. And number 3, you must identify the client. And that's repeated a half a dozen or dozen times. By the way, back to number 1 there, grossly negligence. I think that implies that a little negligence or a moderate amount of negligence is okay. So remember that. And yeah. So how did this happen? Well, that's me. I'm happy with my profession. I love what I do. I love teaching. After I became an appraiser, I went back to school for 14 years, took a pile of graduate PhD level classes in economics, econometrics, statistics, math, and insurance from the math department at San Diego State. I love doing this. I'm trying to help the profession as much as I can. We're so privileged to have Jim Park here today. And with that, I will turn it over to Jim for his presentation. Thank you all for being here. Go ahead, Jim.
Very good. Thank you, George.
Oh, did I introduce you properly? Or is that close enough?
That's probably close enough. I've been
Okay.
around long enough that I expect most folks know who I am and what I've done. Just real quick, my name is Jim Park,
Thank
and
you.
I'm the former executive director of the Appraisal Subcommittee. I'm the president and CEO of the Collateral Risk Network now. I retired from the subcommittee at the end of last year after almost 16 years with the subcommittee. Prior to that, I held positions as the chief appraiser with a Wall Street firm. I also worked on the staff of the Appraisal Foundation back from 2000 to the end of 2003. I was the first appraiser to work at the foundation. I was also on their board of trustees, and but the majority of my career, at least recently, has been with the subcommittee, and that's probably where most of you know me from. And it's great to see a lot of familiar faces. Just like George had said, it feels like being surrounded by friends. So, uh, with that, I will start out here. Let me share my presentation. Can you see that before I
Yes,
go to slideshow? Okay.
perfect.
So,
Oh, Jim, I forgot you one thing. That thing on your lapel, that a little airplane. What the heck is that?
oh, well, thanks for asking. So, my father was a B-24 pilot in World War II. He was also a MASH helicopter pilot in Korea. He was in Vietnam, and uh, in between those wars, he was a fixed wing and helicopter pilot in air sea rescue over in England as well as here in the United States. He flew RC-121s, Constellation. Some of you may be familiar with those back from the 50s. But he he retired from the Air Force in Colorado Springs in 1972. And in 1974, he started an appraisal firm. And I followed in his footsteps. I was blind as a bat when I was born. So, and back then, there wasn't much you could do about it except wear glasses. And that meant you weren't going to be a pilot in the Air Force. So I followed him into the appraisal arena. And I'm thrilled to have done that. I wear that pin to honor him and the men and women from World War II who, if we hadn't had them, I think we'd have a very different country and we'd be talking about a lot of different things. So I'm a volunteer at the National Museum of World War II Aviation in Colorado Springs, where we have 29 warbirds that all fly. So anytime you're in Colorado Springs, let me know. I'd be more than happy to show you around. It's a really cool museum. But thank you, George, for asking,
Absolutely.
and thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm not quite sure exactly what I'm going to talk about because there doesn't seem to be anything going on in appraisal land these days. So we'll
Right.
try to make our try to make our way through. And I really look forward to your questions at the end. No longer being with the federal government gives me a little more sway in expressing some of my opinions and thoughts about the way things are going and what's happening right now. So with that, I also want to remind everybody that this is my presentation, doesn't necessarily reflect the opinions of my board at the CRN or the board members' companies. So just some background here. Those of you who have seen me do presentations over the last 16 years or so have seen a lot of this, but I think it's important in terms of where we're going with the discussion today to talk about what the purpose of Title 11 is, um, and how that purpose is still being acted out. So when Title 11 was passed, 1989, uh, it was part of FIREA, the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act, which covered a lot of ground. It was on the heels of the savings and loan crisis, where the whole banking system was really compromised and threatened. Congress never wanted to prevent that from ever happening again. I'm not sure that they were totally successful, but that was the intent. And Title 11 of a much bigger act is what created the appraisal regulatory system that we have today. And there's a couple of terms that I think a lot of you will be familiar with uh, that I want to point out. And as we go through the presentation, this will be part of what I talk about in terms of how things have really changed over the last um, 35 years, 36 years since Title 11 was passed, and why ultimately my conclusion is that we really need to revisit appraisal regulation and upgrade, make some changes. And the first term that I'll call out here is federally related transactions. So the purpose of Title 11 was to ensure that public policy interests in real estate related transactions are protected by requiring that real estate appraisals utilized in connection with federally related transactions are performed in writing, by competent people with the proper education. So one of the main features of Title 11 was establishing the regulatory system that we have, consisting of the private sector, the states, and the federal government. The private sector is represented by the Appraisal Foundation, probably the most unique aspect of the regulatory system. The foundation is a private 501(c)(3) uh, uh, that uh, represents the appraisal industry, if you will, and profession. The state regulators, they're probably the most classic part of an occupational licensing system. Virtually every occupational license out there, whether it be insurance, attorneys, accounting, they're all regulated at the state level. And they're regulated at the state level without federal oversight like we have with the appraisal regulatory system. So the state regulatory programs, there's 55 in all, the 50 states, District of Columbia for territories are all subject to Title 11 and oversight by the Appraisal Subcommittee. So the Appraisal Subcommittee's role is oversight, but it's also to provide support for the other aspects of the regulatory system. And that support comes in the form of grants to the states and the Appraisal Foundation. Over the last 35 years or so, the foundation's been granted north of $20 million by the Appraisal Subcommittee. The state grant program is newer. That really started after the Dodd-Frank Act, which gave the subcommittee significant additional authorities and responsibilities. So the subcommittee's role is one of both supporting the profession. That's why I have it, at the bottom of the diagram here to show that the subcommittee supports as well as provides oversight to make sure that both the foundation and the states are complying with Title 11 and the federal requirements in Title 11, and if they're not, to call that out. So let's talk about the foundation. It was started by several trade groups, the most prominent trade groups in the profession in 1987. Uh, they were smart. They knew that, or they surmised that legislation was coming on the heels of the savings and loan crisis. So the profession got together, created the Appraisal Foundation, and wrote the initial version of the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, or USPAP. And indeed, in 1989, they were proved to be correct, and Congress saw that the foundation had already written the first set of standards, and Congress tends to do this. They took the easy way out and said, we'll just anoint the foundation with the authority to establish the standards, and then the appraiser qualifications came along shortly thereafter. States are required to incorporate USPAP into their laws and regulations. That is the standard that they judge appraisers by. George alluded to that in his opening comments. USPAP it is a very useful, regardless of what you think about the content of USPAP. The idea of having standards, uniform standards across the states, across the profession, lenders using them, AMCs using them, appraisers using them. That is really a very helpful aspect of the regulatory system. And the Appraisal Foundation, there's nothing in law or regulation that requires this, but by their own choosing, they also support personal property and business valuation. So in 1989, FIREA was passed, and the states were mandated to establish appraisal regulatory programs or face federal derecognition. So that's the ultimate threat or enforcement tool that the appraisal subcommittee has is derecognition or non-recognition of the state program, which essentially means that mortgage and commercial lending, back then in particular, with some of the changes to the definition of FRTs, this becomes a little bit murky. But the idea has always been that if a state were non-recognized or derecognized, essentially the federal government would no longer recognize the licenses or certifications in that state, and essentially mortgage and commercial lending would cease in that state. So it's an enforcement nuclear bomb, and for obvious reasons, it's never been used. It's been threatened, and it's an effective threat when used, but it has never been carried out. The subcommittee recently issued a proposed rulemaking uh, as a result of some of the changes to their authority under the Dodd-Frank Act. I'm not sure where that rulemaking stands, but it would have given some clarification and some additional authority in terms of options to the subcommittee in lieu of or in front of a derecognition process. So let's talk about the subcommittee a little bit more. Their their overarching goal and requirement in Title 11 is protecting public policy interests in federally related transactions. There's that FRT reference again. They provide oversight of state appraiser and appraisal management company regulatory programs. They monitor and review the foundation's compliance with FIREA. They provide financial assistance through grants to the states and the foundation, and they maintain the national registries of appraisers and appraisal management companies. There's a real distinction here between the authority that the subcommittee has over the states and the foundation. The subcommittee has, as I just described, more classic oversight authority that you expect from a regulator over the states. But in the case of the foundation, the only authority that the subcommittee has is to monitor and review. So the subcommittee can write letters, they can work with the foundation, they can request things, both privately and publicly, as they've done over the years. But ultimately, the foundation does not report to the subcommittee. Subcommittee is made up of 7 large federal agencies. The 7 agencies that regulate both mortgage and commercial lending are the agencies that are on the subcommittee. Right now, the acting chair of the subcommittee is from the FDIC. So let's talk about some pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages in each area of the regulatory system. So the Appraisal Foundation, several advantages. These aren't all the advantages and disadvantages. These are just giving some examples in what I think are some of the most important ones. Industry expertise. One of the great things about the foundation is they bring to bear different parts of the industry through their standards board and qualifications board, board of trustees. And that's part of what Congress intended. They really intended and wanted to have a self-regulating authority or organization setting the standards. And Congress really liked the idea of having the profession regulate itself. Flexibility, being a nonprofit, it can be more agile than a government agency in adjusting their standards and qualifications. While I've always encouraged them to try to, when there's a fork in the road between acting more like an association and acting more like a government agency, I've always encouraged them to act more like a government agency for their own protection and protection of the overall system. But they don't have to. They don't have to. A good example is a government agency. If you're changing rules, you have to go through a much more rigorous exposure process, going through the Federal Register, putting the proposed changes to any rules, and USPAP and the qualifications become rules or regulations and law as well in a lot of states. But the foundation doesn't have to do that in terms of going through the Federal Register. And then the uniform standards, as I mentioned, provides a national framework, which is really useful for lenders, regulators, and the courts. So what are some of the challenges? And we've seen some of this play out over the last few years. Funding. The industry stood up several years ago to the consistent and constant changes to USPAP. A lot of those changes were perceived to not really be necessary. Some of the changes were they would make a change to USPAP in one edition and then change it back the next edition, which created confusion and in a sense that maybe that the changes to USPAP were more financially driven than need driven in terms of bettering the understanding of USPAP and enforceability. So the downside of no longer changing USPAP on an annual or biannual basis is that was a big source of their funding. So it's unclear to me. I don't have access to their financials anymore, but I think everybody's probably well aware. You can see this in their annual report that USPAP, the sales of USPAP was a huge asset in terms of their revenue. Now that they're not changing USPAP as frequently, it's unclear to me where their funding is coming from. I know that there's still USPAP education sales, licensing for USPAP education, but in the past, that was a relatively small part of the overall revenue stream. Lack of accountability. The foundation, as I mentioned before, they're not subject to true oversight by the appraisal subcommittee or any other federal entity. There have been questions about insularity and a lack of transparency. Board appointments and decisions have been criticized as opaque. I'm sure some of you watched the hearings that the subcommittee put on over the last couple of years, largely driven by the CFPB, and a lot of questions that they had for the foundation in terms of transparency or the perceived lack thereof. And then mission drift, expanding into other fields that are the foundation started before Title 11. Uh, so I want to be clear, the foundation has every right to, they're a private organization. They have every right to get into personal property and business valuation, but that's not their federal mandate. And it's always concerned me that they're a very small organization, just like the subcommittee. And having these additional mandates that are internally driven can create a situation where they take their eye off the ball. The subcommittee. Well, when I first did this, we hadn't had all these news articles come out, which I'll talk about in a minute. But so advantages, high level focus on appraisal issues. Uh, the fact that you've got seven of the biggest, most powerful, most significant federal agencies, not just in the United States, but arguably across the world, sitting on the board of the appraisal subcommittee, tells you that the Congress and the federal government overall, president's always got to sign these changes into law. So you've got the executive branch, as well as the other agencies really think that and believe that appraisals are important. And I think that that's really important for everybody to understand is that the federal government really uh, values the profession and understands that it's really important to keep the appraisal profession populated and getting new people into the profession, more diversity into the profession, and we obviously have some challenges there. It's funded by appraisers, so taxpayers are not paying for the appraisal subcommittee, any part of the subcommittee at all. It all comes from all the funding comes from the National Registry or National Registries now. Initially, the National Registry just consisted of the Appraiser Registry. As a result of the Dodd-Frank Act, the subcommittee was required to establish a registry of appraisal management companies. And in doing so, it took about 3 or 4 years for the registry to become fully populated by all the states. And once it was fully populated, we saw, which was only 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago at this point, um, we really realized what the revenue stream, the additional revenue was going to be. And it effectively went from about $3.5 to $4 million per year to over 11 million to when the AMC registry came on. So the AMC registry added somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 million to the bottom line. Very small staff. When I started, we had 9 people. When I left, we had 14, 15 people. That allows that size staff, even with all the federal government um, bureaucratic requirements that the subcommittee is subjected to, it's still a small, nimble, and highly qualified staff. And I really want to emphasize on the quality of the staff at the appraisal subcommittee. Many of them, there's been several retirements over the last few years, but they continue to have a lot of staff that is drawn from state regulatory boards in particular. And so they appreciate what the appraisal subcommittee does, and they are some of the best people I've ever worked with. And some of the things that I'm hearing right now that are taking place are really concerning to me because of some of my personal relationships, but they ought to be concerning to everybody. And then, of course, they provide federal oversight. Um, the federal oversight is creates a certain cohesion and support for the appraisal regulatory system. And I guess this is an advantage. They're currently sitting on about $30 million that apparently they haven't figured out what to do with. And I hope they can put that money to work as soon as possible. So challenges, interagency structures inefficient and very difficult to manage. So some of these things you got a yin and a yang to what's positive and negative. Having seven agencies on a board like this is, yes, you have the advantages of all those perspectives, but it creates a highly inefficient and difficult management problem for managing the board. People may not realize just how much authority the board has over the staff. And in the past, the board would allow staff to uh, do the work fairly independently, of course, with lots of reporting to the board and oversight from the board. But that's changed in the last few years, where you have a lot more hands-on management from the board, which frankly leads to politi uh, uh, having politics involved more and more in some of the decisions in the management of the subcommittee. So the lack of enforcement and rulemaking authority, the subcommittee only has a handful of areas that they have rulemaking authority in. That creates some challenges. The lack of enforcement authority over the appraisal foundation and the limited authority that they have over the states. Some would say that that's really good, and I understand uh, limited government, limited federal oversight or input uh, can be a good thing, but it also creates challenges when the whole system was set up in for that oversight to really take place and be effective. Um, Again, small staff dealing with when you have a staff of say 9 to 15 people dealing with seven behemoth regulatory agencies, the Federal Reserve and FDIC and OCC and CFP. Well, CFPB isn't quite as big anymore. HUD, there's that creates a lot of mouths to feed, shall we say, in terms of addressing their various questions and concerns. I've been on calls, briefings where there's more attorneys from one agency on the briefing call than staff, than the total number of staff at the subcommittee. More and more, it's been subject to political influence. Um, that really started with the first Trump administration. Some of you will remember the temporary waiver that the subcommittee issued for North Dakota. That took probably close to 2 years of our time. It was not a small undertaking, and it was in the name of deregulation. The problem is it was just completely ineffective, and my guess is not a single loan was ever um, uh, completed in the state of North Dakota using that waiver authority. Because because part of the problem was even though um, uh, you had the waiver in place, you still had to find somebody to perform an appraisal. So it was a waiver of licensing requirements, not a waiver of appraisal requirements. So you still had to find somebody to do an appraisal and comply with USPAP. They just didn't have to be an appraiser. I'm not too sure there's a whole lot of those folks out there. Um, and again, the funding surplus is a challenge, and now certainly with the executive orders not allowing agencies to replace or add staff has really become a challenge for them as well. So moving on to the state appraisal regulatory programs, the advantages, this is the way it's typically done in terms of regulation. So the states have a lot of experience in occupational regulation. Now the state appraisal licensing boards don't, in many cases, interact with a lot of these other agencies, which I would hope that changes in the future because they can certainly learn a lot. The state appraisal boards, as most of you probably know, they're very small too. They have a lot of resource challenges, both human resource challenges and financial resource challenges. And one of those challenges is having to keep up with the changes that are coming forth from the Appraisal Standards Board and the Appraiser Qualifications Board. And of course, having local expertise, particularly in the enforcement arena, is crucial. So if you have complaints, when you have complaints against appraisers, having people who are in the market, even though, as George pointed out, it can be one person's opinion who happens to be a board member or an investigator. It can be their opinion versus the opinion of the appraiser. I've hit on some of the challenges. Uh, Title 11 is an unfunded federal mandate. Dodd-Frank attempted to address some of that by requiring the subcommittee to give grants to the states. Some of those grants appear to have been curtailed here recently, and I hope they'll get going again with providing that grant funding because it can really be helpful, very helpful to the states. Now they have the additional regulatory burden of oversight, of AMC oversight. It's a very different enforcement problem between oversight and enforcement of individual appraisers in corporations. In some cases, multi-billion-dollar corporations who have lots of attorneys. When the state is confronted with that, I think it can have an impact on how they carry out their enforcement. The other problem is the way that the rule was written after Title 11, excuse me, after Dodd-Frank was passed, creates a very confusing enforcement authority for the states to use in terms of enforcing the Dodd-Frank requirements and the subsequent rules that were written by the agencies for oversight of AMCs. USPAP and qualification revisions, again, are challenges for the boards. And then, again, the board and staffing changes. I don't know that this has continued, but certainly over the last few years, up until the time that I retired from the subcommittee, we were seeing a lot of challenges on the heels of COVID in the states. A lot of changes in personnel, in particular, and a lot of changes in the way they do things. So, with all the news here recently about the appraisal subcommittee, I expect most of you have seen these articles in Biz Now. It's really distressing to see what has taken place over the last several months at the subcommittee, and now you've got um, the media involved. You've also got Senate, the Senate involved. Two members of the Senate Banking Committee, uh, Cortez Masto, as well, Senator Cortez Masto and Senator Rounds have weighed in. And the term that they have used is chaos. at the appraisal subcommittee. And when you have the subcommittee is the agency, is the organization that is the glue for the entire regulatory system. If the subcommittee is dysfunctional or non-existent, I don't know how the rest of the regulatory system functions in a way that is um, uh, without that oversight, the ability for the rest of the system to remain glued together just is not going to continue. Uh, so, for example, if the subcommittee either effectively or literally is no longer there, when the foundation makes changes to USPAP, when the foundation makes changes to the qualification criteria, it essentially becomes a voluntary change for the states. And sure, some states will go along with it, but if there's nobody coming behind to say, hey, if you don't do this and you don't do it the right way, we're going to write you up in our compliance review. And oh, by the way, the subcommittee has the non-recognition hammer as well. Without that, you're going to see maybe slow or maybe a very quick degradation in the uniformity that we have in place right now. I would highly encourage if you're concerned about this, contact your senator, contact your congressman, and let them make sure that they are aware of the problems and ask them to look into it. Uh, there needs to be transparency and there needs to be a bright light shown on what's going on right now. And BizNow, who's been doing the reporting, they also did some reporting on problems at the Appraisal Foundation a few years ago, titled "Deep Cracks in the Industry's Foundation." So there's a lot that we need to work together to improve. So, hence my conclusion: the current regulatory system is not effective any longer. And that's not pointing any fingers at any individuals, at any of these agencies or the foundation or the states. But what has happened over the last 35 years is Congress, in my view, has not tended the garden. If you don't tend your garden and pull the weeds are going to overcome what you really want to grow, whether they're flowers or vegetables or whatever you intend to grow, you've got to take care of it. There have been so many changes over the last 35 years in technology, in just the mortgage lending business, the commercial lending business. Uh, Title 11 has not kept up with it. It's overly complex. There's no real need for appraisers to be more highly regulated than attorneys or accountants or financial services providers, which is what we have right now. And that leads to an inefficient and unsustainable system. So I see, there are variations in how you want to look at this, but from my point of view, there's really three large or general changes that need to be looked at. One is enhancing the existing system, moving to more of a state-controlled system, or halfway in between reducing the federal role. So let's talk about these. Enhancing the existing system. Um, One way to, there are several bullet points here I have include broaden the ASC membership, which is part of the banking bill that just came out. It would add the Department of Veterans Affairs, as well as USDA Rural Housing Development to the Appraisal Subcommittee, which I think would be an excellent change. Um, Redefining federal related transactions. Okay, so I keep talking about this FRT thing. When Title 11 was passed, 95+% of the mortgage lending transactions, residential in particular, fit underneath the definition of an FRT. And over the last 35 years, through the establishment of ever increasing thresholds and through exemptions, the number of loans that are subject to title to FIREA, and arguably, therefore, the appraisal subcommittee and the appraisal foundation, because that's the root of their authority as well. It's argued that's now down to 5 to 10%. Back in 1990, 91, a letter was written right after the Federal Reserve established a $100,000 threshold, and this was before the exemptions, I believe. There was a letter written by 12 congressmen, including the father of Title 11, Douglas Bernard, Congressman Bernard, basically to to the chair of the Federal Reserve, saying, "What are you doing? We never intended for this many transactions not to fall under the auspices of regulation and not be considered FRTs." Uh, didn't didn't change the trajectory. It doesn't seem at all because I think the threshold is now up to $400,000. We have, I believe, 14 exemptions, including Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, any loan that qualifies to be sold to Fannie or Freddie is exempt from the definition of an FRT. Loans insured by FHA, guaranteed by VA, they're all non-FRTs. Now, the states have adopted all of these requirements, so the hook really is with the states in terms of requiring appraisals in these different areas. So you could redefine that so that we actually know what the playing field is in terms of when appraisals are required at the federal government level. You could streamline state and federal regulations to reduce redundancy and provide ASC with added regulatory authority and legal authority to provide adequate oversight over the foundation and the state programs. Without that oversight, without the proper oversight, the work of the foundation takes on a questionable. I'm not saying that they've done anything wrong or do anything wrong, but any organization needs to have some level of oversight. And without it, particularly when you're in the public sector like this, without it, it tends to lead to problems in terms of um, how the changes and how the decisions that are being made are viewed, and establish a clear source of revenue for the foundation and federal resources for the states. That could come from the appraisal subcommittee in the grant authority. I've always been convinced that that's what Congress intended, is for the foundation to be largely funded by the appraisal subcommittee, and years ago it was. In 2020, the foundation started not accepting federal grants anymore, but now they have started requesting federal grants again. I just don't know that they'll um, ever approach the size of the grants that they used to, or really fit the need, the revenue needs that the foundation currently has. So reduce the federal role. There are other examples out there, such as FINRA, that oversees the financial industry's they're called the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. And you also have the Public Company Accounting Oversight, PCAOB, or finally referred to as Peekaboo. Those are good models that have where an SRO was established to oversee the accounting and investment and accounting industries. PCAOB came along after Arthur Andersen had their problems back in the late 90s. Now the PCAOB has been under duress. There's an attempt and may still be an ongoing attempt to get rid of the PCAOB. I don't know if that is any kind of a looking glass into what the future is for the appraisal subcommittee, but I think it's something to watch. So essentially, you could continue with the a similar program that we have now, except probably establish a new SRO that would take over the role of both the foundation and the appraisal subcommittee and leave the states in where they are. So what deregulation, turn it over completely to state control. That's another option. And I expect that's an option some, if not a lot of appraisers would really like. Because if there was no longer a federal requirement to regulate appraisers, I feel pretty certain there would be some states that would regulate appraisers and there'd be some states that wouldn't. But that is an option to, eliminate the federal oversight and allow states to decide whether they want to and how to regulate appraisers. Um, I think this would be more aligned with how countries around the world outside the United States regulate their valuers or appraisers. I think the industry users of appraisal services there would be a real backlash because uh, the beauty of the uniformity that we have with USPAP and the qualifications would slowly or very quickly erode, which would make obtaining appraisals and judging the reliability and credibility of those appraisals much more difficult. So, in conclusion, the regulatory system that was envisioned by Congress has a lot of positive aspects. However, it's broken. We need to revisit the definition of FRT, and because it's the basis again for the whole regulatory system, and figure out what's next. Um, I've hit on several of these. We're already a highly regulated and overly complex, opaque, subject to a highly regulated, overly complex and opaque system. The system is hampered by misaligned incentives, a lack of accountability, and unnecessary bureaucracy. And legislation to date has been reactive, not proactive. Now, there has been legislation that dropped here recently. Uh, the banking bill that came out of the Senate Banking Committee here in the last few days. It's the first bill of any sort. It's a big housing bill, as you're probably aware, with some components, with some appraisal components. In my view, some good, some bad. But this the this banking bill is more forward looking, although it doesn't address any of the real problems I've just with the system that I've just described. But it would add some improvement. So I think it's the first bill to pass out of the Senate Banking Committee in 10 years or more. So it's kind of a monumental change. It passed out of the Banking Committee with a vote of 24 to nothing. It's a bipartisan bill. That tells me it's very likely to make its way out of the Senate, probably before the end of this year, and then it'll go to the House. And once it goes to the House, who knows? Just in conclusion, I want to give my organization a shameless plug that we're having a meeting next week, a week from today, starting a week from today in Washington, D.C. We have some fantastic panels. The first day is going to be focused on the changes coming down the pike from the GSEs, UAD 3.6, which are probably the most significant changes to appraisal reporting and how mortgage lenders use appraisals in the last 2 decades. So we've got officials from Fannie and Freddie who are going to be there to take questions. We're also going to have a workshop where we're going to work through some real scenarios on the UAD 3.6. So lenders, we're focusing on lenders and AMCs in this, particularly smaller lenders who really haven't gotten the word yet. And this will be a monumental change. And then the second day, we're going to have a Washington update. And as luck would have it, this bill dropped. So the Washington update is going to largely be focused on this bill. We have at least one Senate staff who is one of the authors of the bill who is going to be presenting. We have a couple of other Senate staff that are potentially going to be on the dais, and if not on the dais, they'll be in the audience, and hopefully they'll be willing to take some questions. So if you have the opportunity, if you're in the Washington D.C. area, I would highly encourage you to register. It's really going to be a great meeting. Mr. Dell, that's all I have.
Thank you so much, Jim. Really appreciate it. We have time for questions. I'm going to ask a few here, but go on the chat function and type in your questions, and Joe and Cindy will edit those and ask them later. I actually have a little bit of a political optimism about that bill you just mentioned coming out of the Senate committee. It was co-sponsored by the chair of the committee, who is a Republican, and the senior member of that committee, who's a Democrat. And I believe it came out either unanimously or highly supported by the committee itself, like in a spirit of working together. Can you believe that? I can't, but who knows? Maybe something will come out of that. Um, and I will be in DC next week. I'm looking forward to that. Seeing you there, Jim, and a lot of other people. I would encourage you to do that. Couple of questions. Actually, Jim, you covered basically everything I had question-wise. You did. I appreciate that. You mentioned four options: enhance the process, reduce federal involvement, or transition to state control. And somebody was not able to be here today said, George, would you ask this question? And that question was, can we just get rid of appraiser licensing at all? What would you think of that idea, Jim?
Well, I think the three options that I provided, turning it over to state control is essentially that. There would be some states, probably smaller states, more rural states that have problems with finding enough appraisers in those markets. I think that there would be some real incentive for them to do away with licensing. I mean, look, Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands, Virgin Islands, are all subject to this. Uh, I think I saw John Brennan in the audience there. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands have 15 or 20 appraisers licensed between them. And I'm sure I doubt there's very many federally related transactions, particularly under the current definition that take place there. So, does it make sense to have little bitty states or territories like that subject to Title 11? Questionable.
Thank you. Cindy, Joe, I don't see any questions coming on the chat. Is it because nobody cares, or is it turned off or something? Cindy, could you check on that? Have another
We've been
question.
getting, George, we've been getting questions directly, and so I have some.
Okay.
Um,
Let me ask one more, then I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds
This is kind of been sticking in my personal craw for a long, long time. We appraisers pay these fees that support the appraisal subcommittee and the appraisal foundation. And yet, as you mentioned, the appraisal foundation chooses to spend a lot of our money on regulating or creating standards for personal property or business property. AVM companies, as far as I know, don't contribute like we do. AMCs don't contribute like we do. Why are we paying why are we at a competitive disadvantage because we're human appraisers in a specific part of it? And it's giving an advantage to AMCs simply because it's a penalty on us. Jim, do you have a response for that?
Well, AMCs are regulated. They're regulated at the state level and at the federal level, just like appraisers. My contention is they're not as effectively regulated as they could be. Um, what was the other part of the question?
Why are we paying the bill on all of this and they're not?
Oh, the AVM was the other part of it. AVMs aren't regulated. So there was a bill that, or excuse me, a provision within Dodd-Frank that required an interagency working group to establish quality control standards for AVMs. And it took them a long time to do it, but they finally got those out about 18 months ago. And I believe those standards become effective before the end of this year, September or October, if I remember correctly. I don't know how effective they're gonna be. Um, they're pretty broad, so we'll see. Um, but AMCs definitely are paying into the system now.
Okay, well, one last question off that, then I'll turn it over to Joe. Along the line of that, I was on a committee on the AVM Standards Committee for 2.5 years. And one of the things came out of that was that the appraisal process or the valuation process is identical no matter who does it, whether it's an appraiser, an AVM, an evaluation. The only difference is who does it, how well they do it, and how transparent is the result. For example, AVMs have zero transparency, though it's a whole industry model that they keep secret, their model or their algorithm, because somebody else could discover it if it's a better one. Uh, so what would be the issue with the universal valuation standards, which the community of asset analysts is working on currently? Universal standards.
Well, I think that it's worth exploring. You know, you have on the international stage, you have the International Valuation Standards that are promulgated by the International Valuation Standards Committee. They're more principles based than practice based, like USPAP, which is kind of a combo platter of principles and practice. One of my concerns with the way USPAP is currently written in the trajectory and velocity of change, particularly with artificial intelligence, I'm very concerned about whether USPAP is going to be able to keep up with uh, artificial intelligence. And I'm not going to say AI, but artificial intelligence. Uh, and if they can't, is that going to hold back appraisers from being able to do business that they otherwise would be able to do because USPAP doesn't recognize it, which might make states uneasy, which will make others uneasy as well.
Very good. Thank you. All right, I will turn it over to Joe for questions from the audience.
Okay, I'm going to start with a question from Ann O'Rourke. Ann wanted to be here but couldn't make it.
Excuse me, Jim, would you take your slide off the screen on share? Go ahead,
Sure.
Jim. Hey, good.
Okay, so there we go. So Ann O'Rourke, she wants to know why you decided to work for CRN.
Good question. Well, as I mentioned, I had retired from the subcommittee at the end of the year, and I was contemplating what I was going to do next. I knew that I wasn't ready to completely get out of the business, and I've been involved more in an ancillary way as a member of the staff of the subcommittee with CRN. But CRN, Joan Trice, started the CRN back in 2003, I believe, and it was right around the time I was at Lehman Brothers, and I was hired to set up an appraisal department for Aurora Loan Services, one of their lending arms. And when I started, it was me, myself, and I was lamenting the fact that there wasn't a good association out there that um, uh, that I could tap into to get some assistance, bounce things off of, and that really led to the birth of the CRN. I'm not saying that it was my idea. I know Joan talked to a lot of other people, but that led to the CRN being coming out, and it was really about chief appraisers at that time. And we hadn't had the Dodd-Frank Act, of course, but at that point, which really boosted the use of AMCs in a big way. AMCs were a small part of the CRM, but it was mostly lenders, and it ended up being a really powerful uh, organization in terms of the amount of information that's shared. To the point that I believe it's 2016, CRN, even though they're just a loose at the time, just a loosely knit organization, they were testifying in front of Congress. So there was a lot of value seen in the organization. She was ready to move on and do other things, retire to some degree. It's my understanding. So late February, March, she and I were talking, and she asked me if I'd be interested in taking over. And after some thought, I thought this really lends itself well to my background and my passion for the industry. So here I am.
Thank you.
Cool. This is from Francois. Uh, could the Appraisal Foundation, a private organization, use the Federal Register to provide notice of changes to standards and/or qualifications?
So is this Francois or Frank?
I don't know him personally. It's Frank.
I know. Yeah, really good question. I don't think so. So in order to have access to the Federal Register and go through the rulemaking process that federal agencies have to go through, you have to be a federal agency. Uh, Now, with I think there'd have to be some adjustments to the law, but one of the things we've contemplated this in the past when I was at the subcommittee uh, with some adjustments to the law and regulations. It is possible, I think, for the subcommittee to uh, utilize the Federal Register to accomplish that goal. So the foundation could provide, whatever, uh, whether it's a draft, proposed changes, and then eventually the final document. Those could go through the subcommittee and be exposed through the Federal Register process. And the beauty of that is it exposes these um, changes. And again, when the foundation makes a change, it cascades down to the states that they have to make changes in their regulations and statutes. I've even seen where sometimes it requires a change in the Constitution of the state. So it's a big deal, and you get a much broader representation of input when you go through the Federal Register. But I would encourage the foundation and the subcommittee to work together to figure out how to do that. I think all of these changes like that, any added accountability will enhance appraisers and others' view of both the subcommittee and the foundation. Accountability is really important.
Okay, next one is from my friend Lou Russert. In November 2024, the ASC board approved a notice of proposed rulemaking to get with comment on a proposed rule. This rule is designed to create a framework for the ASC's enforcement authority over the effectiveness of state appraiser and AMC programs. And she's wondering where it is.
Well, I'm no longer with the subcommittee, so I don't know. I'm afraid I can't answer that question. I know the rulemaking was closed. I think there are some executive orders, or at least one executive order out there that may create a problem in terms of them following through and actually getting that rulemaking across the finish line. But you'd have to ask the subcommittee. I'm not sure.
Okay, Chris Crochelle, what happened to customary and reasonable fees?
Great question. I alluded to the fact that the way the rule was written, particularly the way the rule was written after Dodd-Frank, the law, was passed, is very confusing. So the Federal Reserve was required to write, and I always love this term, an interim final rule. And they had to do it, I believe, in 90 days. And that is lightning speed for a federal agency, particularly of that size and importance, to do anything. And I don't think that they were successful in terms of the language that was used in around customary and reasonable fees, which leads to a lot of questions in the states. Some of you will remember the Louisiana State Board ventured into trying to establish customary and reasonable fees, and they got slapped down by the Federal Trade Commission. That really put a chilling effect on other states enforcing customary and reasonable fees. So I would hope that that would be reopened for clarification, examination, and clarification.
All right, there's one last comment that came into me. This is from Greg Sessler. The entire appraisal profession is intended to protect the integrity of our financial systems and the finances of federal and state governments. That basic premise seems to be forgotten in our public debates.
I wouldn't disagree with that. You know, unfortunately, particularly those of you who are in the residential arena, know that there's a perception out there that most of your clients are more interested in getting a number that works to facilitate the loan than really using it as the risk management tool that it was meant to. You know, it's a hurdle to get past all too frequently without the emphasis on how important it is to risk management. There's a lot of um, there's a lot of reasons for that. It's not just that people don't care about appraisals, but when you really look at where the risk is, if the GSEs are buying all these loans and they're assuming the risk in large part from the lender by buying these loans, lenders may not perceive that they have to be as careful with the appraisal process, particularly for residential loans, as you might think or hope.
Okay, that's all I've received. John, did you get any?
Yeah, so Francois, aka Frank, sent me another one as well, which is so what is adequate oversight of the Appraisal Foundation?
Ooh,
Well, that's for Congress and others to decide. But I think that there are some uh, adequate oversight would include being able to take action if the appraisal subcommittee deemed that what the appraisal foundation is doing is outside of Title 11 or not in the spirit of Title 11. So that's, that's there would need to be rules written to clarify exactly that. But in general, um, I think having enough oversight without too much oversight. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I think that the appraisal subcommittee should, not now and not when I was there, should ha have their thumb on the foundation to the point that they can't be independent, but they need accountability. And that's what's lacking. There's really no accountability for some of the decisions or limited it's accountability within themselves, which, I'm not sure that that works, but it's the accountability that I think, well, I'll say I know accountability equals credibility.
So I'll ask this follow-up question. So would it make more sense for the appraisal foundation just to be dissolved and the ASC to take on that role?
Not, no, not in my opinion, not like that. You don't want, I I can barely say this word, but the politicization of that we've seen over the last few years really would concern me to have the subcommittee take on that role. I think you could put the role of the subcommittee and the foundation into, if there is such a thing anymore, a less political agency. So you could put a lot of the work that's done into the Federal Reserve or the SEC. Just two examples of agencies that are generally considered less political than some of the others.
Very good, Joe. Is that it? We're right on time, amazingly. How did that happen?
One last one from Lou.
Okay.
With only 5 to 10% of FRT left due to all the existing waivers, how would federal deregulation and the idea of giving states the sole primary regulatory agency further erode oversight and lead to inconsistent oversight? With less appraisers shouldering the costs of supporting the state agencies, how sustainable will this model be? This is a big issue in California. We've got declining appraiser numbers. We're down to 7,000 or so. I just had lunch with some friends at Bria, and they have this huge backlog of work. So I think it's a very relevant question right now.
And again, what the question for me to answer is what?
Let me go through this again. So with only 5 or 10% of FRTs left due to waivers, how would deregulation and providing it, passing it on to the states work? With less appraisers shouldering cost, is it sustainable?
Well, I think that there would be, um, it would all depend on what deregulation meant.
Yeah.
So deregulation, frankly, I think if you use the model that I was describing, where you have you put the work of the foundation and the subcommittee into a small department or division with one of these agencies, it's going to um, lead to less political issues. It's going to lead to less um, misaligned incentives. And what I mean by that is uh, changing standards for the purpose of revenue would be, I think, the biggest example of that. You wouldn't have that issue anymore. You're going to have other problems. I mean, it's the government. So there is no perfectly elegant solution to this. But if you chose to do away with the federal requirements, I think what you would end up with is some states are going to regulate appraisers and some states aren't. And then how does that all play out in the financial system? I'm not sure. You know, I wouldn't even want to speculate because there are so many different directions it could take, both positive and negative. I think that lenders would have apoplexy if you no longer had standard, if you no longer had USPAP.
And with that note, Jim, thank you so much for being here, agreeing to do this. Been really great working with you. Joe, John, Cindy, appreciate all the familiar faces and names I hear. If you have any suggestions on anybody else to interview, let me know. And we'll try to be much harsher next time than this time. We've been way too easy on you, Jim. Thanks all. Y'all go home. Thank you very much for being here. Take care.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the great questions.